Hello, this is the Auburn Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So feedback is important. Feel free to reach out to me, and platforms to do so will be provided for you. All right, and also I have a Shopify store. It's newly created. Well, fairly new. Launched it to show y'all the talents that I have. And also, I can custom make things. So, feel free to email me with your request. And that link to check out my Shopify store will also be provided for you. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on. I'm on Speaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, just to name a few. All right, so this episode is going to be my consensus and my thoughts about the aspects of fashion, and then the aspects of how that transcends to different, from my point of view, from American culture and all of that with fashion on out globally. As a connection to give you all my thoughts about the aspects of how I've said in pieces, but extended thoughts. And this will be the the end to me finishing and wrapping up one of after this week I will continue normally on Fridays, but just thought I'd change it up a little bit for y'all. All right, here we go. All right, so, okay. Me, it's one of those things, people have a different point of view about fashion depending on the decade and the trends that go along with that. So, growing up and being a part of the 90s kid generation, there was a lot of transitions with the aspects of, it happened before my generation too, of course. But it was very prevalent that music and fashion, it was emphasized a lot when I was growing up. Music and fashion go hand in hand. Specifically when we get into the aspects of grunge. How innovative is that? Where, we have rock musicians coming into the scene around in the late, mid to late 80s, early 90s. And they have a specific sound. But when it was becoming more and more popular and then mainstream to the point of it, fashion houses emulating the look of the grunge look, as it's stated, that really means something. So to me, that said it that the aspects of what is embodied to the spirit of a sound or is really what is influential in clothing. And the fact that something like the grunge genre of music could be that trendy speaks a lot about the aspects of what was encouraged in the 90s. That the aspects of subculture can be mainstream. And so, you take it for what it is. Some people, that their perspective, so, they're just trying to capitalize on what's popular. They don't actually care. And then some people would thought it was pretty innovative because it's welcoming the aspects of people's of different ideas about what is social commentary on how the world works and how you perceive to look. So, excuse me, I'll be right back. And so with the aspects of grunge, it goes along the whole ideas of some of it's about the establishment and making comments about that. But mostly it's about the stance of where youth and culture collide, to where what is the aspects of trying to figure out where I want to place myself in society. Do I want to, be just conformative, or do I want to go against conformity? And then speaking out against conformity and saying, what does that actually mean if you just conform and you don't have your own identity? And there was a lot of grunge, quote unquote grunge artists, and it's just it's a strange statement because musical artists that had that title, the ones that were really about the embodiment of it, didn't want that label because they were just in it for the music. And that's why a lot of turmoil that came out of the aspects of that, because most of the artists they didn't want that label. They didn't want that heightened fame and rage about it, because it was going against their main purpose of what they wanted to do. Okay, so going on to other aspects. Also, what was quite interesting too, growing up in the 90s, is the aspects, because I had talked about it when I extended it out, the aspects of fashion models, supermodels, and what that actually means. So it's crazy because, some people were like, oh, yeah, but they knew who they were. The aspects of models being household names, you get into the undertone of that translating to them becoming part of mainstream culture and then mainstream entertainment. Even some, supermodels became action starlets. For instance, Cindy Crawford. She was in herself. I'm sorry, I have something. My allergies are kicking my butt right now. I'll be right back. All right, so she in herself, it was nuance in the aspects of what is thought of when you think about a model versus a supermodel. And she had, as I mentioned before, she took on the aspects of her being the host of the House of Fashion, MTV's House of Fashion here. She was already well established into her career, and then, which is quite interesting about the aspects of models and what is thought of, the contemporary consensus about what is thought of, at a certain point and you reach a certain age in the modeling industry, you hang up your hat and move on. And that's all well and good. It's just certain things where, it's, you have the opportunity to do it, but it's just a fleeting thing. And you can say that for most instances. But it's just quite interesting when there are, aspirations that remind you those are the cases. And so when she did a show like House of Fashion, you really got a inside clue in the aspects of how fashion works. And then you also got the aspects of entertaining the idea of, you see these particular models and understand why they are so well known and why they mesh up with certain imagery and why they're used with certain campaigns. And so that goes along the lines of saying, does advertising actually work? Hold on, I'll be right back. Because some say that, advertising is just a nuisance and it's just something that's there to be there. Some say that advertising is useful because it informs people of what's in the market. And some businesses really use advertising to and take full advantage of it to get people in a sense of understanding that branding means everything. Okay, so a good example of that is Guess jeans. Now, when the 90s came about, and then Calvin Klein, before then Calvin Klein was selling the image of, controversial aspects of sensuality sales, okay? And that was heightened to going up to 11 when we get into aspects of the 90s. So, Guess jeans, you had this sort of look when it comes to it. The sort of Bridget Bardot sort of mentality of where you have this full-bodied woman, which is fit, but not, it have curves, but all in the right spots. And you have black and white, which eludes sensuality. And then you have the aspects of going back to the 19, well, I would say maybe 40s, starting in the 40s, all the way to the 60s, the bombshell. And so that was very, very much capsulated in the aspects of, Guess jeans. And so people, started to take a look at that and say, okay. And so it was just a revolving door of each fashion company, mainstream or otherwise not, couture or something, to do what is new, do something different. Now, translate that outward globally. Now, I have said again, and it really means something, and that really is something, that you are a walking billboard, whether you want to be or not, with what you wear and what you choose to wear and what you don't choose to wear. And when we get in the aspects of translating that globally, that means something different versus what does that mean and, from an American sense. And then what things mean from an American sense means quite different, translates quite differently. So it's quite interesting with the aspects of how it started out. When we get into the golden age of Hollywood, we have, for the 1940s femme fatale kind of look, and how that really struck a chord with people globally of the sense of fashion and identity with America. And then when we go into, can't stress enough, the aspects of travel is very important because it deepens your own horizons about what is perceived and how things work and how people are. So clothing really speaks a lot to what is valued in certain cultures. And on the surface level, something that seems, there's something, you get the typical imagery of, okay, for instance, like somewhere like France and Italy, which are the capitals of fashion in itself. Certain imagery strikes up with fashion, in a fashion sense. You get the old Paris, the streets of Paris, old contemporary cafe shops. You get berets, you get baguettes, you get all of these things. But that's not necessarily really the whole identity and the fashion that goes within the French culture, because there's so many different layers to that. And that translates into the aspects of Italian fashion and culture. Get the aspects of Vespas or something like that, and wearing scarves and stuff like that. There's more to it than that, And this whole reason why, certain countries are more prevalent with the aspects of fashion versus others. Most of the time that has to do with the economic structure and how flourishing, certain countries are when it comes to that aspects. And that is the driving force with the aspects of the economic power and all of that. But that also comes with the aspects of the political influence in those cultures. Because whether some people want to, it's one of those things that people want to be contrite, and they know when the heck's going on, but they just want to be, do that BS move where it's not, fake delusion, when they know in actuality it was actually what's happening. Well, how the political structure really motivates how people are perceive things, and how the aspects of what they wear is perceived, and how they can go about everything. So it's quite different when you get in the aspects of, socialist structured countries. You get in the aspects of communist structured countries. You get in the aspects of dictatorships, monarchies. Those really have a heavy influence on the way people view themselves in the aspects of what they wear. Oh, sorry about that. So, people who understand the aspects of what the really downfall of communism and the downfall of socialist, the aspects of socialist regime, just full-on socialist regimes, is really hurtful because it does not give people the incentive to have new ideas about something. And so when people have new ideas about something, then again, that opens the opportunity for people to delve deep within the way they feel about what they wear, what they don't choose to wear. And so that goes into the whole aspects of health and fitness too. It's one of those things that go hand in hand. When you feel good about yourself, when you have the where it be the economic opportunity to feel good too, and to have opportunities to grow and develop, you and the person in suit, depending on where you are in the world, you will showcase that. But that also depends on the structure in which everything is going too. I mean, that can't be ignored. And so also the religious structure too, and how that flows in the aspects of how people wear their attires and their traditions too. That's very influential too, which is very interesting when that is talked about. So from Christian values, typically that's which is there's different the Catholic and that, and then going on down the lines to Muslim, Hindu, and all of this. But traditionally, Christian, Judeo aspects have deep roots in American structure and value. And so just quite simply, you dress out of respect. And then that goes back to the aspects of when we get into the tides of the tradition of where that came from to, and when when it was more established in the medieval era about faith and the disposition of how people should come to represent themselves in their faith. The powers that be, whether it be a priest or so forth, they didn't want people just coming out of the streets looking any sort of way, because that in the aspects gives the division of social status too, of who's more valuable and who's not. Now, needless to say, not everyone thinks like that when you get in the aspects of how you adorn yourself with clothing, and it comes to spirituality. But that's something to also consider with the aspects of where things come from, because I've stressed this before. The aspects of history is very important to know where things come from and how things were, because it helps to make a whole lot of sense of what's going on now in the aspects of culture and values. And so it's just that can't be undeniable too on the other side of the aspects of how the political structure is in the aspects of each culture, that really goes in what people wear, what people don't wear. So getting back into health. Now, for the most part, health is supposed to be an aspect, sort of a holistic thing, where if you take care of yourself, you start to feel more acceptable to caring about your, how you, what you do, other aspects of what you do, whereas be with how you feel about yourself and your disposition with friends, how you feel about yourself and your disposition with your own family, and how you and then the interpersonal, where it has to do with courtship, versus going on to the winning ticket of marriage and so forth. Now, if you have a healthy disposition about things, of taking care of yourself and have that discipline, that really impacts the way everything else flows in your life. Now, that goes into the aspects of fashion too. If you have the opportunity to have the mentality to have healthy attitudes when it goes towards the aspects of fashion, that really transcends the aspects of how people feel about clothing too, and where it comes from. And so, when you get in the movement of body positivity, what is that actually saying? Now, I said this before, and I stressed this before, the aspects. It's important to really listen and see what is actually being said about certain things, or why it's so popular, why it's trending, why is it main culture. And so when you get in the aspects, there's nothing wrong with understanding and knowing that not everybody's going to look the same, which would be strange for some, to have that mentality or to think that. But that's one thing. But there's another thing to say that being morbidly obese or having no kind of control in the aspects of what you do with your own body is a gross misstatement of positivity. So that in itself also shapes and changes the way people think about clothing and feel in clothing. Because look at it like this, and I'll end on this. Okay. Would you really want to be around someone that says all day long, just like there's films that emulate this too, personify this too, all day long, oh, they don't care about my body, they just want me to fit in a certain image just because they think that's more superior, when most of the time there are negative aspects about the imagery of how women and men look when it comes to fashion. But that's not always the case. Most of the time it's just what's wrong with wanting to look your best. That's what it's promoting, what's wrong with wanting to look your best. And of course, there's people that have more muscle and they aren't all that, rail thin, but they have muscle and they're fit. And why would you want to be around someone that says, oh, they don't want to accept that people just naturally fat, that's just how it is, and they have to accept it, and it's just wrong because they don't want to accept it, and blah 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 blah, whining and complaining all day. Nobody wants to be around anything like that. But that's why I say, it's very important to really get that going and pay attention to that, because that also shapes the way people want to think about clothing too. Because if they feel that way, that sort of mentality has a disdain look when it comes to higher fashion, couture fashion. Oh, we have to change the structure because it doesn't fit our agendas, because it's that they're going against or this. But you can just simply understand and know that, you're not going to be able to wear everything. You're not going to be able to look a certain way. It's how it is, But you and yourself can have a more balanced attitude when it comes to that. Anyway, this reaches the end. And, of course, I would like to know what you all think. And I appreciate all the listeners out there. All right, so tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.